Amazing. So I guess the first place I really want to start is to find out how you got started in photography. Is this something in your family or is it something you picked up on your own?
This is something that I had picked up on my own. Actually, my uncle and I had a conversation recently about it. He used to live in Indonesia, and he was telling me a story about how he owned 2 Hasselblad cameras and how they were stolen. And so I was a little bit bummed to hear that, because I was like, wow, that could have been 2 cameras I have. But but nevertheless, wow. I got started a couple of years ago, more seriously into photography. I really just wanted to do something creative with my spare time, and just have a reason to go outside and explore, places that were unfamiliar. I'm originally from Arkansas, which is in the southern part of the United States. Mm-hmm. And I moved to California, the Bay Area, originally for school, and then now just to work. And so it was really just a reason for me to get out and, just explore different places and just get a feel for the neighborhood, the city that I lived in. So that's pretty much how I got started.
And you shoot a lot of film. So what is it that makes you want to shoot film?
So originally, a couple years ago, when I got started, I originally wanted to shoot digital. And at the time, my impression was that digital was going to be more expensive than film, which looking back at that decision, I don't know if that was quite the right assessment, but I wanted to learn more about photography. I wanted to learn how to manually operate a camera. And from conversations that I had with people that I was interacting with on Instagram, it seemed like film was a good route to go. And so that's pretty much the reason why I started shooting film. I really love it. I still shoot on my phone because it's always with me. I don't always carry a film camera with me, but if it's, if I'm purposely going out on an afternoon to just walk around, I'll take my film camera with me.
There's a pretty outdated, especially I think maybe over here, I don't know if it's the same over there, but there's an outdated myth about film shooters that they're kind of snobs about digital photography. But I don't think that's the case anymore. I think it's just literally down to what people enjoy using. Would that be right?
Yeah, for sure. I don't have any sort of ill feelings towards people who shoot digital. Like I said, I still shoot on my phone quite a bit. I actually sold my digital camera last year simply because I wasn't using it. Funny story, when I visited New York, I think it was back in 2017, and I had taken my digital camera with me and my phone. And it was right around the time when the iPhone 10 came out. And I ended up shooting with it almost 80% of the time that I was there. So I really love the camera on it. Like I said, it's always with me. So if I'm, walking around as, a city street or something, and I see, a shadow or I see a sign that's really interesting, I'll photograph it. And I do have thoughts about, how I could bring together those two, film and digital, because I do notice with my work, there's a difference between how I shoot on my phone and how I shoot with a film camera. And I think both are really interesting, and I'd love to bring them together. But those thoughts of like people saying, well, why are you mixing digital and film? Sometimes those come to my mind. And so going back to your original point, like I don't look at them as, I look at them as like shoot with whatever you're comfortable with. Go for whatever look that you are wanting. Yeah.
What's your camera setup at the moment then?
Right now I'm shooting with a Mamiya 645 Pro TL. It's a medium format camera. I've had it for almost a year. Before that, I still have it, a Canon 81 program. That was my first film camera. Yeah, and it's a great camera. I mean, I still it's kind of my black and white camera now since I shoot color on my Mamiya. But yeah, that's my setup.
So what's the for you? What's the difference between shooting with the 35mm and the medium format? Is it you know, do you just prefer the kind of aspect ratio that you get? Is it the depth of field that you like, or is it just how the Mamiya works for you ergonomically?
Yeah, so I mean, when I jumped into film, 35mm, that was like all I knew, and so you know, I shot with that for over a year, and you know, I didn't have any qualms about it. It was perfect for what I was using it for. But I reached a point where I was looking at my images and, you know, missing sort of like that resolution, that quality that obviously you get with digital, but you can get with like 120 film and other film formats. And so that was my main reason for making the jump from 35mm to 120. Like I said, right now, I still use 35mm for like black and white because I feel like with black and white, the texture of it is really nice with 35mm. But for like color images where I'm really trying to like communicate the feeling of a scene, like I try to show it as pure as possible. And so I think 120 does a really good job of doing that.
What film are you using for each, for the color and for the black and white?
Color, I use Portra 400 for almost everything. The only exception is I use Ektar 100 for night photography, which people always ask, like, why are you using, you know, Ektar for night photography? Isn't that something that you would use for a different situation? And my answer to them is I just love the color that you get from it, the contrast, especially at night. And so that's like my go-to film for night. For black and white, right now I'm still in the mode of experimenting with different films. I just recently got some HP5 and Delta 400 and Delta 3200 because I wanted to try some portraits. But with black and white, I'm pretty, you know, I go back and forth between different films.
So a bit of a broad question here. It's kind of a hard one to answer. Everyone I ask this to seems to struggle with it. And I think that's kind of the point. How would you describe your work?
Yeah, that is a hard one. I would say this, like my work is a reflection of sort of like my interests. And my interests are trying to create interesting compositions. And then also making images that remind me of home. And I hope that that's what comes through when people look at my work, that they get a sense of like, there is something really interesting about, you know, this, the shadow that this sign is creating on this brick wall, or the color of the trim around this house. You know, makes me feel like this house is very welcoming, or the shot of this park, of this swing set, or, you know, this basketball court or basketball goal, gives me memories of like going to the park when I was little and, you know, playing basketball with other people. I hope that's what people get when they look at my images. And that's how I would describe my work is, work that just kind of reflects the ordinary, the everyday moments that we sometimes overlook. But you know, if we if we slow down and think about it, those are the moments that actually bring us good memories.
I get the feeling when I look at your work, and I found you through the page that you curate, but I get the feeling when I look at your work of like really solid establishing shots from great movies. That's why I always feel like when I see your images, it just reminds me of like great insert shots or establishing shots from movies that it almost pisses me off because there isn't a movie for me then to watch. It feels like a really good tease. A lot of the places you shoot, I'm guessing, are places that you know very well. is it hard to shoot somewhere new? Is it hard to shoot somewhere you know very well because you almost become too used to it? What's the challenge there?
I would say it's more challenging to shoot places that are more familiar because, I'll use a good example of this. When I left Arkansas, um, you know, I looked at everything as it's like, oh, well, there goes, the dollar store, or there goes that random ice cooler in the middle of this open field, or there goes, this abandoned gas station or something that, we pass by on the highway and don't think anything about. You see those things every day. And you just think nothing of them because they're always there. You don't expect anything to happen. They're just there. And when I returned back to Arkansas after being in California for a year or so, and that was after I had really gotten into photography, those moments just really blew me away. Like, I was like, wow, these are actually really interesting. Like being detached from them really opened my eyes to how much I was missing on a day-to-day basis. And so I would say for any place that's like unfamiliar or being removed from a place for a period of time, I would say, I don't know if I would say it's easier, but it's a lot more interesting to explore those kinds of places because, like I said, I feel like, there's, you can just find really, you just tend to overlook things when you're, in a place that you're always, and kind of lost my train of thought there, but
no, I get you. I'm about half an hour up the road from London. I'm originally from London, and it's pretty much like one of the go-to places in England for street photography, for architectural stuff, because the rest of England's generally quite boring. But I find London really difficult to photograph because everything's been done and it's a bit cliche, and I'm just far too familiar with it. Whereas when I go somewhere completely new, it might not have the same luster to it that other people would see, but I find it more interesting because it's not played out. One thing about your work though is the familiarity. It feels like every image you really know the place that you're photographing, and whether or not you do, I think that's a sign of a really good photographer, the fact that you're kind of showing someone in almost as if you're the expert on the place, even if you're not. How often are you out shooting?
Well, lately I haven't been out much because of this.
Oh yeah, true.
Coronavirus, but I go out maybe every other weekend to shoot. When the weather is nice. I remember there was back in February, I shot for about 3 or 4 weeks straight, and maybe twice a week, which was kind of like a spurt because before that I maybe shot once in January when I was at home. And then before that, back in early November or something. It's usually when, I'll say this, lately, I have found that taking breaks between shooting really sort of helps me be able to go out into a place and to look at it with fresh eyes. And it's kind of a process thing. I feel like just trying to force myself to shoot. And, I've heard people say, like, when you get creative block or when you feel stuck, just like keep shooting through it and just keep going. And, eventually you'll get out of it. That doesn't tend to work for me because to me, I feel like if your eyes get tired after a while of looking at certain things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And your eyes, just like with anything, like your body needs rest, your eyes need rest. And so that's what I've tried to do lately is when I want to go out shooting, it's like, well, am I going out to shoot because I feel like I have to shoot, in order to, feel like I'm being productive? Or do I genuinely want to go out and shoot because like I have this urge of wanting to capture something that is missing, and that, when I say missing, a lot of a lot of my work is about trying to find, again, places that remind me of home. So when I have these feelings of like, oh, I miss home, or like, what does home look like? It's like, well, let me go out and explore and try to find these scenes that satisfy that missing piece.
I suppose the other danger as well, considering you're shooting film, is that if you're in a creative rut and you're not getting the best images, it's an expensive way to get your way through a rut, is to just keep like blasting through rolls of film. I didn't ask, but out of interest, do you develop your own film?
Not at the moment. I use a local lab. I do scan my own film, but that's something that I would like to do, is getting to developing my own film. That's one of the things that I also like about the medium, is just how tangible it is, and being able to own that process from, putting the film in your camera to shooting through a roll and actually processing it. That's something that I eventually want to work towards, because I just imagine that really changes like your perspective on, how you shoot and what you shoot.
Definitely. So I'm really in love with like Midwest America and Western America, especially retro America, the old cars, the old architecture, the old houses. So I don't really know if I could answer this question, but with the scenes that you're photographing, is there a danger that you could kind of overshoot certain places and almost exhaust all of your possibilities compositionally? Because obviously it's a diminishing a subject that's diminishing, because obviously as new things are built and old things are knocked down, you don't have that access to like new retro stuff. You only have the old retro stuff. So are you sort of careful to not overshoot when it comes to these places, or do you just go with what's working with you at the time?
I go with what's working with me at the time. I do think that that does cross my mind sometimes, like, am I overshooting a certain subject matter? Like, for instance, I recently shot through a neighborhood, and a lot of my photos were essentially the same thing because all the houses look the same. Right. And I was, I had these thoughts. It's like, is this a bad thing that I'm photographing the same thing? Are other people going to get tired of seeing this? And that's something that does cross my mind pretty often. And so I've tried to, at least with my own work, try to curate it in a way and space it out so people don't get so tired of seeing the same thing, because I feel like that's something that is easy. That's an easy hole to fall into, especially if you've had success photographing one thing and everyone really likes it. You're like, okay, well, everyone likes the photos I'm taking of like these type of cars, or, these type of buildings. So therefore I'm going to just continue taking photos of these, and it just becomes easy, and it becomes monotonous and less interesting, at least for me as a photographer. And so,
it becomes less about the art, right? It becomes more about kind of fulfilling a quota of like sort of validation on social media. If you're just doing stuff because you got good feedback from it, you're not doing it because you like it. You're doing it because you think you're going to continue to get praise for it. Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a hole that I don't want to find myself in. I try to, even if it's a photo that other people don't like, I remember what it was like to stand there in that moment. Like, there's a photo I took of this little house on this open field with two railroad signs in the foreground and the middle ground. And, most people will probably look at it and say, oh, this is just a typical like Midwestern scene, just this little country home and, railroad tracks going through the scene. But I remember what it was like to stand there in that moment, where the air was crisp outside, it was really bright, and just hearing sort of the cars passing behind me in the background, and just thinking about like the relationship of like this area close to where I live, and sort of the memories, of driving down this highway my parents, I going to church and them dropping me off at the babysitter and stuff like that. So it's those kinds of things that I try to focus on my own photographs. And if they happen repetitively, if they, happen over and over again, then, so be it. I don't have to share them all at once, but I just try to focus on like, what I'm interested in.
You're kind of like, so I was trying to pin down what you were. Are you like a fine art photographer because you take some particularly abstract shots of, like you put, very normal scenes, but you find a really interesting way to compose them. But I don't think you're a fine art photographer. And then I was like, is he a street photographer? But I don't think you're a street photographer because I feel like you're too documentarian for that. Whereas street photography, I feel like is almost looking for repetition or geometry. I actually think in the purest sense that you're like a photojournalist where you're just documenting your memories, I guess, and documenting what you enjoy and what you like and what's aesthetically pleasing to you. And then that, if people resonate with that, then that's fine. But the quota of your work, is it entirely to sort of fulfill that memory bank of yours and to sort of journal what it is that you're going through?
Yeah, I would say that's on point with what I'm doing is documenting these places and these scenes, and they're all sort of a response to either a memory or sort of something that I'm going through at the moment. I had someone tell me, they were like, well, all your photos, are kind of absent of people. They almost feel empty or lonely. And I don't know if that was something I was supposed to take as a compliment or if that was, something that I need to work on as a person. But it goes back and forth between that and just documenting scenes and places that I find interesting. And when I share them with people, I look at it as something in terms of like, hey, here's a photo I took of this landscape with these telephone lines, vanishing into the distance. What's interesting about this is like, the clouds above it, it looked very stormy. The idea of being in this just vast open space, and I have my own sort of thoughts and feelings and memories that I can attach to these photos, but I like for them to be open so that other people can look at them and be able to insert their own feelings, memories, and thoughts into them as well. So I don't want someone to look at it specifically and say, oh, Ryan really likes cars or Ryan really likes, this particular thing. But I want people to look at them and to really think about sort of like, why is it that I like this? Or why is this interesting? Or how does this relate to an experience or memory that I have? And, how does it resonate with me?
Well, I don't think that necessarily the absence of people is a bad thing. I find it funny, people always feel the need to kind of correct other people's artistic integrity. So if you photograph, so I photograph weddings for my job. I'm a wedding photographer by trade. And something that I constantly get off of photographers is that they would not do wedding photography, but I've never ever asked someone if they would, but they feel the need to tell me that what I do is beneath them. It's a very bizarre thing with people. They feel the need to constantly correct other people's sort of artistic integrity. I'd say with you, the lack of people is probably really beneficial because the scenes that you're showing have loads of personality, but generally speaking, if you put a person in a scene, the person dominates the scene, no matter how small they are. Humans, we're animals, we're designed to seek out threat, we're designed to seek out who's around. And if there's someone in a photo, we tend to be more focused on them than anyone else. There's actually an image of yours, which I think is of your dad cooking. And even though he doesn't take up the bulk of that frame and he's not the main focus of that image, he still dominates it because that's the way it is with people. We seek people out and we seek faces out. And, pareidolia is a big part of the human psyche. I actually really like the absence of people in your work. I think it leaves a lot open to interpretation and it actually causes some people to kind of think about what the scene tells them as opposed to just having everything spoon-fed to them. Not to go off on a rant or anything, sorry.
That photo that you were just talking about with my dad in the kitchen, cooking, I remember when I got that frame back and I was like, oh my gosh. Cause I remember I was pushing that. It was HP5 and I was pushing it, I think a stop or two. And it was indoors. So that was, even worse. I was like, oh gosh, it's going to be like super dark. And I saw, I was like, I can't see his face. But after I spent some time looking at the image, I was like, I really wasn't trying to define sort of like his facial features and, him as much, but showing like the, the action of him just being in the kitchen cooking. And I would say with a lot of my photographs, I try to compose them in a way where there is like a subject that you can latch onto, but there's other stuff around it that's interesting as well.
Yeah.
For instance, like with cars, I use this as an example a lot because I do like photographing cars. But there's, like the image of the car and, the swing set and the little work shed in the background, those may not be the most interesting things, but I think they're important to the entire scene because they give context to, the car that's sitting there as well. And so that's something that I like try to focus on when I'm composing these scenes is like, there may be like a singular point of interest, but what's around it that also can like elevate it or provide some sort of like context or story around like that one thing.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm actually quite fascinated to find out when you go out and shoot, what is it that first sort of compels you to start photographing a scene? Is it like the color or the geometry, or is it you just latch onto one aspect, like you really like a house or a car and you just build from there? What makes you first start shooting?
It depends on where I'm shooting. For instance, there's this neighborhood here in the Bay Area where all of the homes have a very similar like boxy design. And what's interesting is I think because they're all so similar in architecture, they're colored in these very vibrant colors. And so, you'll see a home that's pink next to a home that's, peach colored next to one that's green, one that's purple. And to be honest, coming from Arkansas, like that was new to me. Like back, no one does that. It's just unheard of to see someone paint their entire house pink. And so the entire time I walked around that neighborhood, that was all I was photographing was like these interesting juxtapositions of like colors next to each other. But there are other places that I walk around, like Berkeley, where there tend to be a lot of like old cars on the streets. So if I walk around that neighborhood, usually it'll be the cars that catch my eye, and then I'll like take a few steps back, look around, and see if there's anything else that's interesting. Like, is this home interesting in the background? Is there a tree or something? And I've passed up cars in things that are interesting. Like if I were to just photograph it itself with like against a green background or like a blank background, it would be fine. But I was like, it's too much noise in the background. There's too much other things going on that it detracts from what I'm trying to, compose here. And so it really just varies upon like where I'm walking.
So you're wandering around neighborhoods with a big Mamiya camera. Do you ever draw negative attentions? Anyone ever bothered by what you're doing?
Not really. I mean, there have been a couple of times where someone has asked, "Hey, what are you doing?" And my answer is usually, "Oh, I'm just, I'm doing fine art photography." I tell that to just the public in general because to them it sounds like, I'm not just trying to take advantage of them or be malicious, because I feel like here, because there's always sort of that concern about, losing your property or losing your livelihood because, everything is changing so rapidly. That's the first concern people have. And I would say a lot of people come up to me and are like, "Hey, where's it showing up? Like, are you a, are you an agent? Are you trying to sell this home or something? Like, no, I'm just
Right.
like,
Okay.
I just find this home like really interesting. And, most people have been pretty nice about it. I've actually had some really good encounters where people, they'll have waved me down and be like, hey, like, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, I'm just photographing. They're like, oh, what kind of camera? And then it just kind of falls into a conversation about, you know, photography or whatever they're doing. So,
I mean, that's what I personally love. I come to America, obviously when there's not a travel ban, but I try and come to America probably 2 or 3 times a year minimum, because firstly, I love Americans. I think it's great because basically 50 countries in one country. There's all these different sort of sub countries within the United States. And one of my favorite things is the fact that you guys just talk to each other. Like, we walk down the street, we can talk to people and they're not freaked out by it. In England, it's not the same thing. We're not particularly open with conversation. If I'm out photographing and so if I'm doing street photography and I'm photographing, I won't have someone come over and ask me what I'm doing. I'll literally just be kind of like followed and kept an eye on. And the first instance I'll know of someone that's really concerned about what I'm doing is if there was like a physical confrontation, if they physically came over and were abrupt about it. So I think like America's a lot more community driven and a lot more open to conversation and stuff. So that's a lot better. But going back to when you're out shooting, is it the case that you're going out specifically in time designated to shoot, or do you have your camera with you and when you're doing other things you might just see a scene?
I would say lately it's been more purpose driven. Like, I will set aside time, like say on a Saturday, if it's sunny out, I'll say, okay, I'll go outside at 2:00 and, I don't set a time limit on myself. Sometimes I'll walk around until, it gets dark, or if it gets, foggy and cold outside, as it usually does here. But I don't carry my film camera with me everywhere. Like I said, I use my phone. My phone, I would say if I'm walking between work and home, or if I'm going to the grocery store, I'll carry my I'll whip out my phone if I see something that's interesting and take a photo of it. It's kind of evolved over time. When I first started and I had my little Canon A1 program with me, it was a little bit easier to do that. Like, after work, I would purposely take the long route home just so I could, take pictures of stuff that was interesting. But it seems like lately I haven't been doing that. So
it's become more like purpose driven.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's because, one, the expense, but also that was one of the things I noticed that changed when I went to medium format. With fewer frames, each frame mattered a lot more. It wasn't 36, it was now 15. And so, I'm the kind of person where I don't want to shoot through a roll of something and then get it back and say, oh, these are all worthless. I want to be able to look at it and say, oh, like, these are really great. Even if I may have photographed the same thing, multiple times just to get the right composition for it. I'd rather do that versus just shooting aimlessly. And then, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, just shooting for the purpose of trying to maintain, a certain regimen, or trying to appease, a group of people and try to maintain a certain image, versus doing shooting based on how I feel.
So I found you through Burbs on Film, which I'm sure sounds absolutely ridiculous in an English accent, but Burbs on Film is probably my favorite Instagram page for. So I have basically 3 sort of lines of photography. I work in weddings. I do portraiture, which is the account I actually contacted you through. And then I have an incredibly poor street photography account. It's like my weakest link. I'm so bad at it. I really enjoy it, but I'm terrible at it. But I found Burbs on Film, and that's how I went on to find you. Can you just, for the people that don't know, explain what Burbs on Film is?
Sure. So Burbs on Film is a community of film photographers from around the world. It's not just limited to the United States, but we take photos from people around the world who share a common interest in the suburbs. And we don't define it as just, your typical cookie cutter neighborhood, as I think a lot of people think of when they hear the word suburbs. But we try to open it up to anything, that brings about memories of home, being with family, being with friends, everyday things, whether it's like going out to grab ice cream, or whether it's going to the pool during the summer, or going to the park with your dog or something like that. It's really a community, bringing together all of those people, all of those photos. And yeah, I mean, it's been great to be a part of. I joined the community a couple of years ago in 2018, I believe. Yeah, 2018. It was actually started a few months before that by another photographer. But I just remember when I joined the community, I was super excited because it was the one community that I actually felt like I resonated most with what I was trying to do with my work. And so it's just been really great to be a part of, and to be able to interact with people who share that interest.
So on the subject of people that shoot stuff that you enjoy, who are your favorite photographers at the moment?
On as far as like influenced by, or just favorite?
Just give me your favorites.
Oh, okay. I would say Stephen Shore and William Eggleston were like influences for me. But I would say I was also influenced by photographers like Justin Namier. He's a local photographer here in the Bay Area. His night work is phenomenal. I mean, he just his attention to like creating these scenes that feel very nostalgic is just amazing. And he and I've had the pleasure of being able to shoot with him a few times, and it's always just really fun to go out with him and do that. Trying to think of who else. There's a photographer in the UK. I'm trying to remember his name now. I can't remember his name.
That's all good.
Todd Heido is another one for night photography. I'm really trying to remember his name. I can't. Well, either way, that's a little bit of a tough question for me, because I try not to limit. I try to be open to being inspired by a lot of people's work, and I'm of the belief that even if a person is shooting something completely different from what you're interested in, there's something to take from that, and it can kind of pull you in a direction that you may not have seen before. And so, I follow street photographers. I follow, people who photograph a variety of different things, because even though it's something, like I said, that I may not be interested in photographing, it may pull me in a direction that I, may not have foreseen. So
yeah, I think if you're always just following people that shoot similar stuff to you, or just very slight variations of what you want to be doing, then you just end up almost following the same path as them, and you're not drawing from a wider pool of inspiration. I think that's usually a problem with photography. People tend to really limit their options with regards to what they're following, and then they kind of go down the same route. Like at the moment, I mean, I don't know how much you know about like the portrait photography scene, but essentially there's just an entire lane of people doing the same, like girl wearing the sort of the light glasses or the see-through glasses that are just, they're not even real glasses, they're fake glasses, but it's that kind of thing in a coffee shop, through a window. It's all the same lane of stuff, and people aren't drawing from sort of a wider pool of inspiration. And when you're not not doing that, you're limiting yourself, and you're not really going to stand out. I think that's usually quite a big problem with photographers, is that they're too keen to fit in rather than stand out.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Ian Howard, that's who I was trying to mention before.
Okay. Right. So one question I want to ask you for sure, and then we're pretty close to wrapping up, but I'd love to know, in your opinion, why the film photography community seems to be so much nicer to each other and such a nice, friendly community compared to the digital community, which seems to be much more competitive.
That's a great question. That's something that really brought me into the community, that's helped me close to the community, is just the welcomingness and the friendliness of everyone that is a part of it. I think it's because we're discovering something new. We're experimenting with something that there's not a standard for. I feel like with digital, there's almost like the focus is on trying to create the perfect image. Trying to take advantage of all the specs that were listed on the sheet that you looked at before you bought the really expensive camera. And so it's like, if your photos don't meet that standard, if they don't, if somebody else takes a photo with that same camera and your photos don't look like that, then, it's like you must suck as a photographer, And so I feel like with digital, there's always that sort of mindset. It's like, I'm just trying to take advantage of like the camera and what is expected to give me. And that's not to say that everyone is that way, but I feel like with film, it's so like, it's so open. Like you can do so many different things. I accidentally opened up my, the back of my camera. So now my film, I'm going to have, light leaks and flares across, everywhere on my film, or, someone tries a expired film that was, has been expired for like 10 or 15 years. And I think it's just that unexpected quality of film that, is that people gravitate towards. This like the surprising nature of it, and seeing people share it and like discovering it's like, oh, how did you do that? And you try to like recreate what that person did, but you do something different. And it's kind of like this is all these different things happening at once. And I think it's just the excitement that's around that is what people gravitate towards. And, like I said, I've every film photographer that I've run into has been so friendly, so helpful, with everything from questions that I have to just wanting to talk, about photography and things that are interesting. And I definitely would agree with that.
Well, I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head with digital photography is like the pursuit of perfection, whereas film photography is almost like creating a personality and the bond between the person and the camera. You learn the faults with your camera, you learn where it is sort of wearing out and where it's wearing down and what it's not been perfected to do without any issues. I'm a big fan of older lenses that have spherical aberration. They have that lovely swirl to them. I'm a big fan of really kind of dysfunctional light leaks in lenses and lens flares. It's the coatings and the constant technical adjustments we're making to digital cameras. And just for the record, I'm a digital shooter. I'm not a film shooter at all. But I just feel like we're trying to overcorrect everything digitally. And I think that the community takes after the cameras. The cameras are very robotic. I think the community is very robotic. It's all about stats and competition. Whereas film, it's about, we're all in this together. Hey, I tried this thing out. You tried this thing out. What worked here? Have you ever tried using this film? Or, there seems to be a lot more of a movement towards keeping the art alive as opposed to it just being a competition. Ryan, it's been absolutely amazing to talk to you. I'm so thankful. You're such a lovely person. But what I want to make sure is that everyone knows where they can find your work. So if you could please give us your social media links and so on, please.
Sure. Well, you can find me on Instagram at Ryan_McSwain. That's spelled MCSWAIN. I also have a website, RyanMcSwainPhoto.com. As of right now, it's probably going to direct you to my design site. I am a graphic designer, so but I do have a photo site in the works. Yeah, it's been great talking to you as well. Thanks for having me.
I could pretend that you're doing okay. I could give in when you want it your way, but I won't do it, no, no way, I'm saying so. He's been seeing someone else. He's been paying for hotels. Oh, it breaks my heart to have to tell you this. And baby, I know it hurts. I know it hurts. The faster you realize, the quicker you learn. So don't be afraid to open the skies he left behind. You won't believe who he's calling that to. You don't deserve what he's putting you through. It's not your fault, though, no.